Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jamf National User Conference for 2022. And this presentation is going to be talking about trustworthy data and how to leverage your Jamf instance to satisfy some very particular business requirements in the ISO IEC 19770. Yay! No. But I promise you, this is going to be interesting, and I do hope that you're going to get a lot out of it. So without further ado, I want to bring up a little bit about the presentation and a brief outline, what to expect, what we're going to be covering in particular. We'll get through some introductions. We'll get through some level setting around definitions and meanings, and then dive right into what the maturity model is telling us, why we need to be concerned with it, and what we can expect when we've got provable, trustworthy data in our Jamf and, more importantly, the CMDB. So without further ado, let's go into a little bit of some introductions. And because quite honestly, I'm just a talking head over here on the side. And if you can't see me, then just imagine your thumb with a face painted on it. So who am I? The aforementioned talking thumb? No. My name's Jeremy Berger, the ITAM coach. I founded Berger Consulting about 5 years now. And after spending about 20 on some years in the IT industry doing hardware and software asset management. I am also a best-selling author for one weekend on Amazon, so I get to claim that title. But no, seriously, wrote a book on this issue, Rethinking Information Technology Asset Management. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or even your local library, or wherever you prefer to get your ebooks and trade paperbacks. So what's the issue? What are we trying to solve here? Well, in spite of some long-held beliefs in the benefits of IT asset management and software asset management, few companies ever see any real results. So what I am suggesting today is that shouldn't be the case. And in fact, there's already a solution described in the ISO IEC 19770 maturity model. But few organizations properly understand the requirements, let alone implement it, and that's to their detriment. So what are you, as the technical folks dealing with Jamf day in and day out, going to learn from this? Well, what we want is for you to have a clearer understanding of the concept of trustworthy data and to be able to speak that language to the people that are consuming the data that you have inside your Jamf tool. And what you're going to see is that when you can test and prove what Jamf is telling your CMDB, there's some serious benefits to your organization. I'm talking serious monetary stuff. And that benefit is going to make you guys look like a rock star. And so if you can learn what the patterns are coming off of this tool and into your CMDB in general, you're going to be in a much more controlling, comfortable, and in-demand position going forward. So what do I mean by opportunity here? Well, back in 2016, a report came out from Gartner, and I have the Gartner ID there. If you guys want to look at it. By 2019, annual spending on enterprise software licenses will decrease by 30% as a result of software license optimization. So this was written in 2016. The prediction was in 2019. And here we are sitting in 2022. How many people out there think we've reached this spot, this plateau of a 30% savings? Yeah, don't bother raising your hands. I can't see you. This was recorded. I don't know if anybody told you that. Maybe I shouldn't be telling you that, but put your hands down. Seriously, you're scaring people. I'm willing to bet you haven't, because we wouldn't be here otherwise. But no, where does this 30% come from? Well, in the article, Gartner suggests 3 areas to focus in on. One is optimizing the software configurations. We all know what we're talking about here. How many times in our organization do we have software going out that makes no sense? Why does somebody get Acrobat Professional when all they do is look at pictures of cats all day? They don't need it. You can get by with Reader, but they're consuming that license, and that's almost $200 a head. Is there a way to figure out what that user really needs for their job and give them the right software edition or cost appropriate software tool to get the job done? Then there's the recycling software licenses. So I'm sure we've all pulled our hair out, right? The person shows up, consumes some software, but then when they leave, does that software ever come back in order to be redeployed? What about the hardware piece? How often you as Jamf administrators are chasing down where that old person was in order to wipe and reuse the hardware and the software? Well, and then thirdly, there's the use of what Gartner at the time called SAM tools. Think ServiceNow, think Flexera, think Snow, where these tools aggregate data from the computing environment, from discovery tools like Jamf, like ServiceNow, Microsoft MEM, or whatever they're going to call it today, and the like, and bring that information in and then leverage those details against some of the wacky left elbow legalese that's in the software license agreements. For example, rights of second use, where if you've got both a desktop and a laptop, so long as you're using only one at a time, you're only consuming one license. Upgrade and downgrade rights in order to normalize what version you're actually on. Think consumption rights, seat licenses, and the like, how you can move these things around so that you can keep your costs low for the rest of the organization. Remember when I said that we haven't been seeing a lot of success? Well, so back in 2021, that was just a couple of minutes ago, feels like, 6 out of 10 respondents to Deloitte's ITAM global survey say they've yet to see asset management as a self-funding program, let alone the cost reductions that Gartner predicted way back in the day. The report keeps getting worse. Vast majority of the respondents, there was around 1,200 CEOs, CIOs, CFOs that were part of this, said that they actually lack a truly effective ITAM program. And beyond that, half of those respondents acknowledge that they're not even going to get to the point. They're not even going to bother to achieve at least a self-sufficiency, let alone the 30% that was predicted way back in the day. So it kind of begs the question, right? Is it actually possible to get to that 30%? Can we get enough information that's going to be able to help make those decisions around proper hardware and software delivery, proper hardware and software recovery and redistribution, and then making the most of the licensing rights that were given to us by our duly purchasing the stuff. Well, before we can answer those questions, let's sit down and get to a agreement on what definitions we're really talking about here. There's a couple of acronyms that are rolling around, and let's just kind of bring it back home, right? What do I mean when I am saying ITAM? Information Technology Asset Management. And here on the screen is the definition that comes from ITIL version 4. Well-established practice to plan and manage the full life cycle of all IT assets in order to help the organization maximize value, cost controls, manage risks, meet regulatory and contractual requirements, and support decision-making around all IT assets. Yes, I had to read that out. Why? Because in version 4, ITIL decided that ITAM was actually pretty important. In version 3, they had this really definition that was, it's a process to make sure you're not overspending, but that's all we're going to talk about. In version 2, they didn't even bother talking about it. So it's an improvement. But now, when I'm talking about ITAM, I want to make a differentiation between software asset management, which is an aspect of ITAM specifically aimed at managing the software. So when I'm talking ITAM, it does mean more of the general activities, but it includes the hardware piece. SAM is specifically software, but I know Jamf is most concerned with the hardware, with the mobile, and with those activities. I promise you, we need to talk and solve the hardware piece if we have any hope of solving the software piece. So when I'm talking about ITAM, I'm talking usually about the hardware. When I'm talking about SAM, that means the software. Now, the ISO IEC stands for the International Organization for Standardization and International Electrotechnical Commission. Why does that title not match up with the acronym Swiss? Anyway, they are the big gurus when it comes to setting independent standards for doing business on basically any level. If you have a need for wood screws, fasteners, rocket engines, there is going to be a ISO definition that describes how big they are, how they go, and where, what dimensions they are, how big the threads, and the like. If you want to know more about it, and they are kind of fascinating, there's a link here on this slide. But specifically for what we need to worry about is the ISO IEC 19770, in particular, the -1 2017. This is the framework that ISO created for asset management. Recently updated back in 2017. Excuse me. So why should you care? Well, because if anybody's going to be talking about best business practices, they're talking about the ISO. And if you're in an organization where some of that's getting batted around, and they're talking about ITIL, and they're talking about the need for IAITAM and some of these other process organizations, they're really talking about what's laid out by the ISO IEC. Now, if you pay attention to this, then one of the nice things about these standards is that they interrelate and interconnect. So if you're focused in on solving your issue with your part of the ISO, that 19770, then the folks that rely and call on 19770 are going to be able to have an easier time with their part, and so on. Now, if you are part of a heavily regulated or scrutinized industry, then ISO IEC is the bare minimum that you're going to need. But I promise you, they will accept ISO IEC's activity as doing best business practice. So if you think NIST, if you think high trust, if you're dealing with California privacy or the FDA or wherever, ISO is going to be able to save you with that. And if you do one, it'll satisfy most of the other requirements in those other groups. It's just a good starting point. So what is the maturity model? Here you go. So this is kind of neat. This is from 2017. Before 2017, I believe it was 2012. Don't hold me to that. They created this 5-tier stepladder waterfall kind of approach where 0 was you had absolutely no controls and 5 was the best controls. Everybody ended up in the middle, and how did you move up and down? By the book. No, it was really difficult and really unwieldy. So we moved down to this 3-tier version of maturity. Can you do these 3 things? And you're going to be doing best business practice around hardware and software asset management. Tier 1, trustworthy data. Knowing what you have so you can manage it. Tier 2, lifecycle integration. Getting a little more efficiency by making sure that you know where things are as they are purchased, used, and either recycled or disposed in your organization. And then optimization is the capstone that then takes this and runs with it up to renegotiating software licenses and defending against audits and finding that weird closet that everybody shoves their stuff into that they then forget about. And 4 years later, it's like, I could have used that. But we're talking about trustworthy data. So what does the ISO mean when they say trustworthy data? Well, here's the definition. And it's really around data and related information that is accurate, complete, relevant, and readily understood. Well, that's great. But what does it mean, right? So if we were in a room, I'd be able to look out at you guys and say, okay, do you agree with this definition of accurate? Or what's your idea of complete? And I guarantee with people in the room, everybody's going to have a different idea of what we mean by that. What does relevant mean to one person is going to be completely different to somebody else. And don't get me started on readily understood. And what's worse, even the ISO is unclear about this. So in order to solve this, we've got to go another step deeper and try to come up with a better idea of what is trustworthy data. So one thing I didn't tell you guys about me, and I'm actually rather unabashedly proud of it. My background is not technology. It's actually philosophy and military history. And one of my favorite philosophers in Western thought is Rene Descartes. Now, maybe you guys have heard of his name, maybe you haven't. That's okay. You have heard of his work, and you have heard of some of his concepts, and he's actually able to drill in. I want to use him as an example to really drill into what we mean by trustworthy data. Now, Descartes' big thing was the cogito, Latin phrase, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And that was the answer to his question in his seminal work called, all of a sudden it just kind of like died in my brain. It was Reflections on a Modern Philosophy. I believe that's what it is. That might not be. Don't hold me to that. But he wanted to reset Western philosophy at the time and figured that, let's start with the biggie. Do I exist? And what he figured out is he has to exist because there's probably 3 scenarios that he could think of that would make him question his own existence or make him believe that things aren't the way they really are in reality. He could be dreaming it. He could have something going wrong, interfering with his senses, like he's ill, and what's really hot is actually cold, or what's green is actually blue to everybody else. The third scenario is that there's some evil genius playing with his head. If you ever saw the movie Matrix, that's what we're talking about. In case Rene is stuck in the Matrix, how does he know he actually exists? And that's when he comes up with this idea called cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I am a thinking thing because, and that's where I'm getting to the end. He has to exist because of all of those 3 things that I said. They're affecting him in some way. He's ill, he's dreaming, he's getting his brain messed with by the evil monsters. Evidence of his existence comes from those things interacting with his mind. So, great. What does that mean for us? Well, let me ask you this. Jamf. How do we prove that Jamf is seeing the entire environment that it should? Because if you can't trust Jamf, then you can't trust the reports that are coming out of Jamf. You can't trust the information that goes into the CMDB. And everybody here loves beating up on their CMDB because it's wrong, because the data's out of book, and somebody didn't fill out a ticket. But if you look at it and say, what if I can prove that Jamf is seeing everything that it should be? It's talking to everything that is actually out there. There's no question. Then when we pass that over to the CMDB, we should be able to trust it too. Or at least within some parameter, plus or minus tolerance. So think about it. What other tools are there out there that you could take data from Jamf and rub it up against and say, yeah, these are in agreement. They're operating inside the same environment. Well, what about your DNS entries, your IP addresses? You're taking, for your scans, a series of IP ranges, sending out a note, and the Jamf agent is supposed to ping back and say, yep, here I am. Right? And if it doesn't, but you know something's out there, wake up that agent or redeploy it. What about Active Directory? Now, I know Apple can exist and work on a network without actually signing into Active Directory, but if you've got a single sign-on that is performing that same function in order to control data access, well, that's another instance. They've got to be on your network in some form or fashion to be able to interact, the user to interact with that SSO, and that user needs to be using an Apple device or some other device to get to that data. Then there's security. Those logs should still be scanning Apple devices. Do they match up within tolerance? The same day that this thing logged in, and got an IP address? Did it also get scanned for vulnerabilities to make sure it's on its latest updates? SaaS usage as well helps. Even if you're not logging into the network, are you sending emails? Are you logging into Azure for Outlook or Gmail? And then, of course, there's command and control tools, just like Jamf. So if all of these are trying to hit the same devices inside the same network, they should be in agreement. So here's an idea. When you are implementing Jamf or you're rehabilitating your CMDB, compare and contrast what Jamf says is in your environment, in your inventory, with other scanning tools that are should be also hitting those machines. Now, you got to make sure that you are comparing, apples to apples. Sorry about that, folks. You've got to make sure that you're comparing the same data sets from these tools, right? Because if you've got one tool like Big Fix that you're only dedicating to Linux and Unix, it may or may not see Apple devices and generate a bunch of noise that you can't quite filter out. Same thing with Microsoft. If MEM is not communicating, then you probably don't want to use that connection between them. You're going to want to actually take the data from Jamf and compare that to the other things. Don't just rely on some pass-through. And finally, you also want to make sure that you're picking the correct key that ties these things together. A lot of IT security vulnerability scans will only pick up network name. Jamf is really good about getting network name, but also the serial numbers. And if you're dealing with end users, you better have some way of ensuring that, whatever end user is being detected or logged in, that a computer name is probably best, maybe even a MAC address, to pick up that commonality. These three things have to have some sort of a hook, some sort of a key field to be able to compare the data sets. So how do we interpret the results? Well, when we do our Venn diagram and bring these things together, our optimal result is where all three are going to agree, that ABC there in the center. That's great. We can say 100% certainty those machines are in the environment, they're being used, bang. Now, in the periphery, this AB, AC, and BC, where two of the three might agree, that actually tells us something. Now, is the device still on the network? Probably. You've got two sources saying, yes, it is. You've got one saying, I've got no idea. So what that usually means, especially in my experience, what that usually means is that the missing source is probably disabled on that device. Something's going on to interfere. And think of the agent on the device is disabled. If it's a agentless scanner, then there might be a network segment that is blocked, or some other port might be programmatically dark. It might be that the VPN's not working. Does your scanning tools work across the VPN, or is it going to have problems if somebody is working outside and going directly into the SaaS service? Then the third concern is going to be that single appearance. It only appears in either A, B, or C. What that usually signals is something has changed with the asset's life cycle, and that scanning tool just hasn't caught up yet. So what you should probably do is look at that tool, find that entry, and take a look at how long it has been. More than likely, something like Active Directory that doesn't ever purge itself, but Jamf or MEM gives you 30 days. and maybe the IT security team is only keeps things around for 90 days. That's probably what's going on. And if you ask your asset manager, they're going to tell you, yeah, we threw it away a long time ago. You can go ahead and clear that record out. So what does this do then in the real world? Well, if you can get this data accurate and trustworthy, then some really neat things start to happen with that SAM activity that goes up the chain into the asset lifecycle and the optimization. So consider this. Inside the ISO, there's 3 different IT-related groups that have a requirement to maintain their own inventory. Asset management, IT service management, and information security management. So those 3 groups right there, you can go out to and say, hey, you have inventory that I should be able to compare against Jamf and be able to say, I am seeing the entirety of the Apple and Mac OS or whatever iOS environment. The next step to that is the asset lifecycle, because as you pay attention and trade this information back and forth on a regular basis, you're going to be able to detect assets being deployed and being recovered, being pulled off, sometimes even before the field service techs get around to filling out their work orders. And even better, if you know what's out there with certainty, then you should be able to do a little bit of math and know without having to leave your chair whether or not you've got appropriate inventory levels sitting in your back closet. And so instead of worrying about whether or not you've got enough to cover the next project, you can trust your CMDB to be able to say, yeah, we haven't seen those devices. We know they've been received. We know they are not on the wire. They're still back there. And if you go in and put a couple of eyeballs to them, then you can confirm it without any sweat. Now, beyond that, when we get into the cost optimization, consider this, that only deployed hardware, 95% of the time, but run with me, only deployed hardware is going to consume your software licenses. So the sooner you can detect when that asset comes off the wire and goes back into inventory, you can release that software license and give it to somebody that needs it. And the sooner you can do that, the less likely somebody's going to try to come in and say, oh, we need to buy some more, and panic. And then you have more than you need. Or even better, you're going to be able to say, yes, all of the assets that are in the environment are covered by licenses. In Microsoft, you can go away because we know more about what's going on in our environment than you do. So what does that look like? Well, so let's take an example. This is a former client of mine. The will remain anonymous to protect the innocent. And the A group was Active Directory. The B group was Tenable, I believe. The C group was actually both a combination of Jamf and MEM. And in this environment, you've got Active Directory with all of these, this crazy amount of population that does not match up with either the security piece or the hardware discovery piece down there in C. What ended up happening is this group had a number of virtual machines running Windows XP that they thought were procedurally spun down as a service support project was completing for a customer. The trouble is they weren't. Active Directory still had them alive, and the farm that was hosting those operating system environments were still active. But what was going on was, as part of the closure, the scanning piece was only communicating with would stop communicating with the operating system environments, but security was still popping the hardware every once in a while, but nobody could see these operating system environments hanging around out there. So that got expensive in a hurry, let alone the security piece. Now, I know that's not Apple, but you can imagine how powerful that is for a group to come in and say, this is wrong. And we've got all of these unsupported operating systems running around out there that we weren't even aware of, that the two other groups weren't even sure of. This slide here, Active Directory, cybersecurity, I believe it was Qualys doing agentless scans, and again, Jamf and MEM working in Group C. So what was really disconcerting was that Active Directory and the Jamf and MEM were in agreement, but there was this big gap with Qualys not being able to see those machines. What was happening was this was part of a merger and acquisition that had happened almost 18 months prior. They had joined the domains, everything was working fine, the new machines were communicating back to the command and control, but Qualys was not able to break into those segments because of network configuration issues. So again, you've got this population of 5,000 endpoints that we're not seeing any sort of updates or antivirus protocol changes or the like. But the other two silos were sitting around. It's like, yeah, they're fine. We see them. Big deal. So to conclude, I hope I've made a case for you to start to take this data, this working detail, this everyday stuff, new devices configured, get them ready in the inventory, and then push them out to your end users. That there's some more benefit, some real hardcore cash that you're going to be able to pull back by offering up this data to your CMDB and saying, look, let's ask about whether or not Jamf is seeing the same thing as cybersecurity, as the SaaS tools, as Active Directory, and the like. So despite the long-held beliefs that in the benefits of IT asset management and software asset management, few companies ever see any results. But if we take a step back and take another look at the requirements in the ISO IEC 19770, we see that there's an opportunity by taking some of this data and reorganizing it, joining it in new ways, we get this extra benefit. So I really want to encourage you as sysadmins to reach out to your organization's asset management and cybersecurity teams and start testing your tool against theirs and find out where the gaps are and make sure that your data is trustworthy and the reports coming out of it are going to be trustworthy for all the other people down the line they're going to rely on. So in that way, all three can improve your results, improve your cybersecurity stance, improve your hardware and software spend, and overcome this idea that asset management is just or IT in particular, is just a cost sink. So I hope this has been eventful, has been eye-opening, maybe even a little bit entertaining. I was told to leave off on some of the jokes, but I do want to continue this conversation. So here's a QR code. I have been, while during this broadcast, I've been hopefully keeping up with all the questions going on. But if you want to continue this conversation and talk more about where some of the other tier 2 and tier 3 optimization activity can happen and how Jamf plays a part in that, click this QR code and fill out a little survey, and we can keep going. For the people that are participating in this viewing, I have a free copy of my ebook that I'll be happy to send to you. So do please click, fill out the information, and let's keep the conversation going. Now, for those of you that are going to be in person at Jamf in San Diego, I'm going to be there too. And if you find me, I'll have a free copy, physical copy of the book. And if you ask nice, I'll even sign it for you. So I hope it's useful. Free book, that's always good. And I really appreciate the questions and the comments and helping make this and Jamf better. So thank you so much. Good luck to you. And with luck, I'll see you in San Diego.